2 months later. You and Dr. Jameson have talked about your Aunt Ruth? I was watching Alyssa race through a big maze of stout, hollow tubes hung from the ceiling at Chuck E. Cheese's. I could only see her through the occasional window and a few clear plastic sections in the big, round pipes. The happy screams of young children playing on equipment designed with them in mind made a noisy backdrop to the conversation Laura and I were having, but it suited me just fine. The place was comfortable enough for Laura and me to interact, but public enough to give us that little bit of space too. Yeah, she said, just loud enough for me to hear over the clamor. But I don't know what she wants to know about Aunt Ruth and Dad for, she added distractedly. She was watching Alyssa too, mildly concerned that an older girl seemed to be shepherding Alyssa through some of the sections. That Laura's counselor was inquiring about her father was news to me. What's that about your father and aunt? I asked. She turned to look at me blankly. What? She asked. You said Dr. Jameson was asking about your Aunt Ruth and your dad, I replied. She shrugged and shook her head. I'm sorry, I was watching our daughter being silly. Mark, she said apologetically. I don't know why I said that, she said. She's been asking questions about Aunt Ruth, but we aren't getting anywhere. I'm really kind of tired of talking about her. I see, I said. After a long conversation with Dr. Jameson a couple of weeks ago, I was a little more sensitive to things Laura said or did. Aunt Ruth was your mother's sister, right? Laura nodded. Yeah, Mom and Dad were devastated when Aunt Ruth had her stroke and died, she said. Well, that's understandable, don't you think? I asked. Ruth lived with your parents for a long time, right? I was trying to pull out some hazy memories from my mind. I didn't know her family that well. We weren't close, though I liked them well enough. Uh-huh, Laura answered. She stood up and walked a few paces to get a better view to make sure our daughter had emerged from an opaque section of the tubing. If you're enjoying my content, consider joining my Patreon community. By becoming a patron, you'll get access to full parts of my videos much earlier than everyone else. Plus, you'll be supporting me to create even more awesome content for you. Check out the link in the description to join now. Alyssa was a little late getting to the next transparent bit of the hollow pipe if she continued running at the same pace as when she disappeared. There was no other place for her to go, though. I was sure we'd see her in another second or two. Your parents were close to Ruth, huh? I suggested when she came back to stand beside me. What? Oh, yes, pretty much, she replied. When Aunt Ruth's husband died, she moved in with Mom and Dad. That was 25 years ago, I guess. Alyssa came running up with another little girl trailing a step behind. She was Terry, Alyssa said by way of introduction, and she was almost 5 years old. Terry's parents waved from a nearby table, nodding as Alyssa made to offer Terry a piece of her pizza. Terry had a younger brother and a baby sister, it seemed. Both were wailing about something and their parents' hands were full. Laura and I talked for another 45 minutes while the two little girls laughed and giggled their way through an astonishing amount of pizza. I was trying to figure out who Laura was and where she was coming from in most everything she said. I looked for a hidden meaning in every subject, every conversation. It was tiring and frustrating. I really wanted to give free rein to my anger at what she'd done. But Dr. Jameson had already told me in unequivocal terms that Laura was suffering, or had suffered, I wasn't quite sure which, from some kind of emotional breakdown. I didn't know what to do or how I should feel anymore. Can you get mad at someone with a mental problem? It seems an awful lot like spanking a baby for wetting a diaper. Neither can control the process and neither is responsible for it happening, right? Alyssa enjoyed the whole experience at the children's pizza restaurant, especially the part about meeting another youngster near her own age. When we left, she skipped through the parking lot holding on to my and Laura's hands. When we dropped Laura off at her brother's, Alyssa accepted it without the crying and heartbreak it had caused last week, the first time I chanced to join outing. I'd explained the separation to Alyssa as being similar to making her go to her room when she misbehaved. It was in terms she could understand and made sense to her. She wasn't happy without her mother, but she could deal with it better this way. When she asked what her mommy had done, I told her I didn't tell others what she did to deserve being sent to her room, and it was only fair I not tell her about what her mother had done. Alyssa didn't like that, but she let it go surprisingly easily. She fell asleep on the way home. The next morning, I called Dr. Jameson and asked her if Laura's unexpected connection between her father and her aunt in our conversation could possibly be significant. As before, she said anything that Laura didn't seem to want to address could surely be important. She promised to keep me in the loop with what she discovered with Laura at her next counseling session. 9 days later, Dr. Jameson chewed on her lip for a long moment, debating whether to tell me something. "Mr. Archer, in your first visit, you said neither you nor Laura was a virgin when you got married, right?" I shrugged and nodded. I couldn't see how this tied into Laura's aunt's death in any way. The doctor decided to go for it. She cleared her throat for a second's longer delay. "Well, Laura did say to be completely frank with you. I just hope she remembers that when we get together tomorrow," the doctor said. Mr. Archer, what would you say if I told you Laura did not, in fact, have 2 lovers before you?" My face must have shown my confusion. "Mr. Archer, Laura was not technically a V, but Mr. Archer, you were the first man to take her." I sat back, stunned for the first time in our conversation. Doctor, I don't know what to say," I protested. "She sure didn't seem like a V that night. Darn, she was as ready as I was." "I don't understand, doctor." I finally just gave up. "Because you were experienced, you led her through the whole process of love-making, apparently pretty effortlessly and without noticing her lack," she said softly. "Somehow she got the impression that her being experienced also was something important to you. She'd been using her, I'm going to have to be careful not to embarrass myself here, but she had experience using a D in her fingers, but that's all," she finished. I stared at her blankly. "But why would she think that, and why hasn't she ever told me?" I asked. "Why in the world would it have made any difference?" It was the doctor's turn to shrug. "We may never know," she answered. "A chance remark, or the lack of a remark, had gesture. No way to tell. Your wife told me about her lack of experience, and she saw some humor in the situation. I think that, while she's forgotten the initial reason, it had some kind of effect on her self-esteem at the start. She brought it up while we were discussing her affair with her. Mr. Pathetic Guy." The doctor began playing with her notepad. "The thing is, Laura told me about it quite easily," she said. "Laura wasn't trying to hide that. It wasn't a sensitive matter to her. At least not any longer." She fiddled with her ballpoint for a long moment. "Mr. Archer, I hope I can tell you this in terms your experience and training has prepared you for." She looked at me closely, trying to read me. She sighed. "In for a penny, in for a pound," she muttered. Taking a deep breath, she laid it out for me. "I'm all but certain that one of the reasons in taking Mr. Pathetic as a lover was that Laura was reversing the role she experienced with you early in your marriage. I found some indications that Laura was trying to teach, Brian how to be a better lover, though she wasn't succeeding very well. The role reversal was apparently therapeutic enough for her to rid herself of the underlying cause." "What was that?" I asked. I knew there was a big frown on my face. Dr. Jameson was trying to be very impersonal with Laura's sexual involvement with Brian Collier, but I didn't feel very detached at all. "I don't know for sure," she answered honestly. "I think it was probably a deeply suppressed resentment at the fact you did guide her through her first experiences. Laura has, in layman's terms, a little streak of contrariness. That seems to be linked in some fashion to her relationship with her father. He seems to have been something of a remote, authoritative figure, but also someone she loved as a little girl almost to the point of adulation. I haven't even begun to make any headway there yet." I opened my mouth, but the doctor held up her hand to stop me from commenting. "It's not going to come all at once, Mr. Archer," she admonished. "Some days we may hit the mother lode, so to speak. Other days we won't have any progress at all. In fact, some of the leads we've already developed may turn out to be false ones. I don't know yet. This just isn't an exact science in any sense of the word," she said firmly. "But couldn't she have resolved that resentment with me? Couldn't she have mentioned it sometime and work it out with me? Together?" "Oh, goodness, sure she could," Dr. Jameson replied almost cheerfully, "but only if she was consciously aware of it to begin with. Instead, she took an extreme route to get to where she was going, and she was solving some other issues along the way, too." "Oh, I see you don't like that word." "Huh." She'd seen me wince. How about problems, huh? Good, we'll use that. That brings up a good point I've been meaning to raise with you. Ah, darn it. We only a few more minutes. I'm sorry I couldn't rearrange my next appointment so we'd have more time, but I felt I should speak with you and bring you up to date. She pursed her lips and looked at me while she searched for the words she wanted to use. Mr. Archer, things are going to begin getting complicated. It's going to get confusing, and you're going to have an especially tough time because I can see you have not yet completely laid aside your anger at what has happened. I understand that Laura understands it, and I need you to recognize it in yourself too. Okay? I nodded. I'd already realized I was going to have to suppress some of my own instincts while I explored this idea of Laura having an emotionally disturbing problem. I was willing to do that, but at the same time, I was offended by it.